My father leaned in close, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and bitter resentment. "Look around, Morgan," he sneered, his eyes sweeping over the lavish venue. "If it weren't for pure pity, no one would have invited you to this wedding. You don't belong here." 21 years ago, this man kicked me out of his house with nothing but a trash bag of clothes, telling me I'd never amount to anything. Now, standing at my nephew's wedding, he thought he still held the power to destroy me. I didn't argue, and I certainly didn't cry. I simply took a slow sip of my wine and smiled directly into his cold, arrogant face. Before he could utter another cruel word, the background music stopped. The beautiful bride stepped up to the microphone, raised her glass, looked across the room at me, and crisply saluted. "A toast to the Admiral," she announced. "My name is Morgan, and I am 40 years old. Looking at me today, you might see a woman who carries herself with absolute authority, but 21 years ago, I was nothing more than an obstacle my family wanted to erase." The crisp, salt-tinged air of the wedding venue blew past my face, instantly pulling me back to the exact day my life fractured into two distinct halves. I was just 19 when my father stood in the grand foyer of our family estate, holding a heavy black trash bag filled with my only belongings. Because I refused to sign the paperwork to join his corporate banking empire, choosing instead to enlist in the military, he looked at me like I was a virus infecting his perfect bloodline. "You leave this house, and you are dead to this family," he had coldly declared, before slamming the heavy oak door right in my face. For more than 2 decades, my father and my wealthy siblings spun a selective narrative to high society, convincing everyone that I had completely ruined my life, failed miserably, and ended up living in absolute poverty. They cut off all communication, treating my very existence as a shameful secret to protect their elite reputation. But they had no idea what I was actually doing during those missing decades. They thought they had broken my spirit, but that cold day in the foyer only forged a fire inside me that nothing on earth could ever extinguish. For 21 years, the silence between my family and me was absolute. I never called, I never wrote, and I never asked them for a single dime, even when the training got so brutal that my bones literally ached for relief. While my siblings were busy spending their trust funds on luxury sports cars and country club memberships, I was waking up at 4 in the morning on muddy bases, earning every single stripe on my arm through sweat, discipline, and sheer determination. I deployed across continents, took on responsibilities that would make my father's corporate boardrooms look like a playground, and quietly climbed a ladder they didn't even know existed. But back home, my father used my long absence to construct a massive lie. Whenever extended relatives or old family friends asked what had happened to his youngest daughter, he would shake his head with engineered disappointment, telling them I was a wandering failure who couldn't hold down a basic job. My brothers and sisters happily parroted the exact same story, using my alleged downfall as a cautionary tale to make themselves look superior. They painted a picture of a desperate, broken woman living on the fringes of society, all to protect their fragile family pride. Little did they know, every single piece of gossip they spread was just fueling the quiet storm that was about to hit them. I let them believe their own lies for over 2 decades, allowing their arrogance to blind them to the reality of who I had actually become. The break in their perfect wall of silence came out of nowhere in the form of a crisp, gold-embossed wedding invitation. It was from my nephew, Leo, my oldest brother's son. He had been a small child when I was forced out, but he'd secretly used social media to track me down because he always admired his rebel aunt, who dared to defy the family patriarch. When my father and siblings discovered that Leo had sent me an invite, absolute chaos erupted in their private group chats. My brother tried desperately to force Leo to revoke it, terrified that I would show up looking like a desperate beggar and embarrass them in front of their high society guests. They truly believed I would arrive wearing tattered clothes, looking for a free meal or a handout. I sat at my desk, looking at the elegant card, and a slow smile spread across my face. I had a choice to make. I could have worn my full dress uniform, covered in medals and insignias that would instantly stop their hearts, but I decided against it. Instead, I chose to wear a simple, elegant navy blue civilian dress, entirely free of logos or flashiness. I wanted them to see me, not the rank. I wanted to look them in the eye as an ordinary person first, just to see exactly how deep their cruelty ran before the truth came out. I packed my bag and caught a flight, ready to step right back into the lion's den. Walking into the luxury coastal venue, the heavy silence of judgment hit me instantly. The air was thick with the scent of expensive floral arrangements and perfume, but the atmosphere turned ice cold the moment my heels clicked against the polished marble floor. My siblings froze mid-conversation, their eyes sweeping over my simple navy dress with immediate disdain. They didn't see jewelry or designer labels, so they instantly assumed their worst fears had been confirmed. Before I could even greet my nephew, my father stepped into my path, deliberately blocking my view of the reception. He looked exactly as he did 21 years ago, wrapped in tailored wealth and absolute arrogance. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and bitter resentment as we stood near the edge of the crowd. "Look around, Morgan," he sneered, his eyes sweeping over the lavish venue. "If it weren't for pure pity, no one would have invited you to this wedding. You don't belong here." He spoke with the quiet confidence of a man who believed he still owned me, expecting to see the wounded 19-year-old girl who had cried in his foyer. He wanted an apology, a scene, or at least a flash of shame to validate his decades of lies to his high society friends. But I didn't argue, and I certainly didn't cry. I simply took a slow sip of my wine, looked directly into his cold, patronizing face, and smiled. The sheer weight of my silence completely caught him off guard, turning his smug satisfaction into sudden, irritated confusion. Before my father could utter another cruel word, the background music stopped. The grand double doors at the front of the venue swung open, and the beautiful bride, Clara, made her grand entrance alongside my nephew. The entire room erupted into applause, the high society guests turning their attention to the stunning couple as they moved toward the head table. But as Clara walked down the center aisle, her eyes weren't just fixed on her new husband. Her gaze deliberately scanned the crowd, moving past the wealthy executives and my siblings, until her eyes locked onto me. A sudden, bright flash of recognition and profound respect crossed her face. My father, completely oblivious to this silent exchange, assumed the bride was simply looking toward our side of the room. He puffed out his chest, completely unaware of the hidden connection brewing right in front of him. Years ago, before she ever met my nephew, Clara had been a young, struggling officer facing immense adversity in a male-dominated environment. Her entire career and life had been completely turned around by a legendary female commander who mentored her through the toughest trials. Clara had no idea I was related to her new groom until the invitations went out, and she had spent weeks hoping I would actually show up. The tension in the room began to rise as Clara elegantly stepped away from the groom, bypassed the traditional cake-cutting ceremony, and walked straight over to take the central microphone for an unscheduled speech. My father watched her, entirely clueless about the storm that was about to hit him. Clara tapped the microphone, the sharp sound echoing through the lavish hall and instantly commanding everyone's absolute attention. The murmuring crowd went entirely quiet, turning their heads toward the beautiful bride standing confidently at the center stage. My father smirked, leaning back as if he were the king of the castle, expecting a standard speech thanking the family for their immense generosity and wealth. But Clara bypassed the usual wedding platitudes entirely, her voice ringing out clear, steady, and filled with deep emotion. "Before we celebrate tonight, there is an extraordinary guest in this room whom I must honor," she began, looking directly across the crowded tables. A leader who taught me what honor looks like and who saved my career when everyone else doubted me. With theatrical precision, Clara turned her entire body toward me. She brought her feet together, squared her shoulders, stood perfectly at attention, and delivered a flawless, crisp military salute. "A toast to Admiral Morgan," she announced, her voice echoing with profound reverence. The entire room went dead silent, the absolute shock crashing over the high society guests like a physical wave. My father's smirk instantly vanished as his face turned completely pale, his eyes wide with utter disbelief as he stared at the daughter he had dismissed as a total failure. My wealthy siblings sat frozen in their chairs, their mouths agape as the terrifying realization hit them. The black sheep they had kicked out and pitied wasn't a beggar at all. She was one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States Navy. The moment the applause finally erupted across the hall, the dynamic in the room flipped completely. My father's knees practically buckled, and within seconds, he and my wealthy siblings frantically pushed through the crowd to swarm my table. The very people who had ignored me all evening were suddenly desperate to associate with my elite rank, eager to parade my high status to their influential friends. My father reached out, a trembling, fake smile plastered onto his pale face. "Morgan, darling," he stuttered, his voice dripping with synthetic pride. "An admiral? Why didn't you say something? We are your family. We should celebrate this together." I looked at him, completely unmoved by his sudden shift. I stood up smoothly, adjusted my simple dress, and looked down into his desperate, aging eyes with absolute calm. 21 years ago, you told me I was dead to this family," I said, my voice cutting through his frantic excuses like ice. "Only pity got me invited tonight, remember? Enjoy the wedding, because you will never see me again." I turned my back on him for the final time, leaving him standing exposed and humiliated in front of the high society peers he cared about so much. I spent the rest of the magical evening celebrating with Leo and Clara, completely free from the ghosts of my past. Now, I'm curious about all of you who listened to my story. What would you have done if you were in my exact place? Would you have forgiven them or walked away? Comment your city below.